If you really look closely, most overnight successes took a long time. This quote is by Steve Jobs, a very apt one for the course or certification we are going to be studying in the foreseeable future. Hi everyone. Today we will be discussing all topics that we will be covering during our CCIE Data Center course training. Here is the agenda for today's session. About the exam, there are some things I'd like to discuss about the CCIE certification in general. Next, we move on to detailed alignment of topics in the exam, the software and hardware updates, and lastly, all the topics that we will be covering during this course duration. So let's get started. Firstly, about the exam. There are no previous certifications or professional courses required in order for you to attempt any CCIE certification. Now, most of you know that CCIE offers multiple tracks. You have data center, security, service provider, collaboration, etc. No matter which track it is that you choose to get certified in, you do not have to have any previous certification that includes CCNA and CCNP. There are no age limits to attempt the exam. Though there are no formal requirements to take the CCIE certification, understanding of topics covered in the exam and a minimum of 3 to 5 years of job experience is definitely recommended so that the entire lab infrastructure is very well understood. Now, there are 2 tests that you have to give in order to obtain the complete CCIE status. Right? So you need to give the written exam, which is also called as the core exam, and there is a lab exam. Coming to the written exam, this is a 120-minute exam. Consists of mostly MCQs, that is multiple choice questions. This exam can be attempted in person at any Pearson VUE Center, or you can also attempt it online. Now, coming to the lab exam, it is for a total of 8 hours. Tests your ability to configure actual equipment and troubleshoot network in a timed situation. Now, you will receive the result of the lab exam within 48 hours. Okay. Now, if in case you pass the exam, in the report, you will only see that you have passed, no other details included. But if in case you have failed the exam, then you will be able to see the score in every section. Okay, so like in the lab exam, there are multiple sections, right? There are multiple domains. So what is your score in each of those sections, percentage wise? That is what you get to see. So that way you will have an idea which section it is that you need to work on. Now, the lab format is a little modified over here. Cisco has divided the lab into 2 modules. So you have module 1 and module 2. In module 1, you have designing, and in module 2, you have deployment, operation, and optimization. You have to first finish module 1, and only then you can progress to module number 2. So in module 1, as part of designing, what is expected out of you, right? What type of questions? What is the format over here? So in module 1, you will get designing based questions, scenario based questions. Okay. For example, like attack engineer, how does he solve customers' issues, right? So customer contacts attack engineer, tells what issues it is that customer is facing. Well, like there would be an email with attachments, with screenshots, with the steps that user has taken to try to fix the issue. but then the issue is not getting resolved. So then the engineer is asking you, okay, these are all the steps that I have taken. This is the output that I'm seeing. What else should I do? Right? Just like that, you get scenario-based questions over here as well with attachments. Okay, with all the steps like, that customer has taken. Very similar questions. All right. So here, this is for 3 years. You finish the module 1, and like I said, only then you progress to module 2. So in module 2, you get hands-on access to all the lab equipments that are present in your topology. And apart from that, you get also user interface access as well. So this is where you log into the GUI and you start configuring whatever is required. Okay. So like I said, module 1, it tests your ability to create, analyze, validate, and optimize network designs. Candidates will need to understand the capabilities of different technologies and translate customer requirements into solutions and assess the network readiness to support proposed solutions. So like I said, you get scenario-based questions, just like a user is telling you what problems it is that he is facing, what steps it is that he might have taken to overcome that issue, and with certain screenshots or probably like packet captures attached, you just have to go through it and then provide a solution to your customer. Okay, so such questions are going to be there in module number 1. Backward navigation is disabled. So you finish the first question and only then move on to the second question. Second question, then move on to the third, and then move on to the fourth. Okay, so there's a certain rule, there's a certain pattern as to how it is that you can finish your questions. You cannot come back to the previous question. Point values are hidden. So what points, how many points each of those questions carry is very well hidden. You will not be able to see it. Okay, so this entire module is for a maximum of 3 years. Once you finish this module, you are automatically taken to module number 2, wherein you get to deploy, operate, and optimize your network. So simply put, you will get, like I said, hands-on access to all of your lab equipments, right? So this is where you get access to the CLI of your devices, you put in commands, you start configuring, and also web-based access, as in the GUI, user interfaces, right? You get to log into the user interfaces that you have according to your CCIE track, and you start configuring whatever is required. Okay. Backward navigation is enabled. So here there is no such rule or format that you have to follow in order for you to complete questions. You could probably start with the 5th question and then come to the first question, then move to the 3rd question. I mean, you can complete questions as per your convenience. Okay, you can complete it as per your comfort. Point values are shown. How many points it is that each of those questions carry is very well visible. So this is for 5 hours. All right. Lab environment is going to give you 2 monitors. It's going to have 2 monitors. So you have monitor 1 and monitor 2. Monitor 1, which is on your left, you will always be able to see your lab topology. Okay, so whatever track it is that you have chosen, your lab topology is going to be displayed on the left monitor. And on the right monitor is where you are basically going to be, logging into your devices, the CLI access, putting in commands, opening the user interfaces, configuring whatever is required. All of these are available to you on monitor number 2, which is on the right. Okay, so these are some points with regards to any CCIE track in general. Last but not the least about the exam, location. So Cisco offers you 9 locations wherein you can book your lab exam and attempt the exam. Okay, so you can book any location as per your requirement, as per your convenience, depending on whichever location is closest to you. All right, so these are some points with regards to the lab exam. moving ahead. Alignment of topics. So here you have the weightage of each topic that is going to be covered in your lab exam. Okay, so for layer 2 and layer 3 technologies covers around 20% of the exam. Fabric connectivity, 15%. Networking and compute, 15%. Storage protocols and features, 10%. Fabric infrastructure, 15%. Automation and orchestration, around 15%. Lastly, security and network services, around 10%. Next on this slide, I have mentioned all the hardware equipments that are used in the lab exam. So firstly, APIC cluster. Now, please remember the details of APIC cluster, the details of the technologies that we will be covering obviously aren't for today's agenda. We're just going to be going through what is there, what is not there. That's it. Okay, so the details of how is it that they are clustering, for example, what is this APIC? How does it look like? How many ports does it have? Is it physical? Is it virtual? How is it that they're forming a cluster, etc.? These details we will be discussing when we move to the actual topic. Okay, today we're just covering the points. So APIC is actually a part of ACI, a technology called ACI. APIC is the controller for ACI, so controller cluster. Nexus 9336 spine, which is also called as the baby spine switch. 9332 spine switch again. 9372, 93180, 9308. 9300 series, that is Nexus 9000 family. Next is 7004 switch, Nexus 7000 family, 5672, Nexus 5000 family, and lastly, when it comes to switches, you have Nexus 2348 fabric extender, in short, also called as FEX. Okay. Apart from that, we also have some servers and chassis and VIC cards for those servers. So we have the C220M4 rack server. Excuse me, there's a VIC card for the C series server. 6248 fabric interconnect. Now this is to do with UCS. What is UCS? Again, we will discuss that as we move towards the topics. 5108 blade server chassis. So this is basically a chassis model. B200M4 blade server, VIC card for the above mentioned server. VIC card model is 1340. Catalyst switch 3750. Hyperflex, the model is 220C M5. Okay, so these are all the hardware equipments that are going to be used in the lab exam. Now, these are the softwares that are installed on those hardware equipments in the lab exam. Okay, moving on. Topics covered during the course training. Now, before we move into Nexus or any technologies, I'd always like to get started with the hardware. This is so you understand the hardware capabilities, the functionalities of the device. It'll be easier for you to then understand the technology. It's just my preference. Okay, so we will be starting off with Nexus hardware first. There are 4 families that we will be covering. 9000 family, 7000, 5000 and 2000 family, and a couple of series in each of these families. Okay, so what are the differences between the 2 series? What are the different models that are available in each of these series? Are they fixed switches? Are they modular switches? We will be discussing all of that. Now, once we're done with the Nexus hardware, we then move on to discussing the differences between iOS and NXOS. So iOS operating system on Catalyst switches, NXOS operating system on Nexus switches. Definitely, there should be some differences between the two. So we will be discussing that once we're done with the hardware. Now, once these differences and the hardware and everything are discussed, we finally now move on to Nexus technologies. So the very first technology that we will be discussing about is virtual device context. Okay, so just to give you a one-liner as to what VDC is, virtual device context is, this is a virtualization technology where this one physical box, right, one physical switch, this is a physical switch, can be divided into multiple virtual switches. Okay, so this is a physical switch. This is divided into multiple virtual switches. This is what is VDC. Now, VDC earlier was only supported on Nexus 7000 series, but now it is also supported on Nexus 9000 series as well. Which of these devices support? How many virtual devices can I create? What about communication between these virtual devices? How do I allocate resources? Because these are virtual, right? I need to allocate resources to these virtual devices. So how do I do that? All of these we will be discussing as we move ahead into the topic. Okay. Now, once we're done with VDC, we then move on to VPC, Virtual Port Channel. So before we start off with VPC, firstly, what is port channeling? Why port channel? So before that, we will be discussing about spanning tree protocol, where it all started from, right? So spanning tree protocol, again, please remember, we are going to be discussing the basics of spanning tree protocol. We are not going to be getting into too much details because it is a part of enterprise, CCIE enterprise. Okay. As a data center expert, of course, you should have basic knowledge on what is happening in your data center, of course. So we will be discussing with regards to STP. So the different flavors in STP, mostly rapid per VLAN spanning tree and multiple spanning tree are used. So we will be discussing about those two flavors of STP, what is the disadvantage of STP, and how port channeling was born, right? How it is that you can create, what are the different methods for you to create port channels, what are the pros and cons of using port channel, and from port channel, how VPC was born. Okay. So just to give you a one-liner with regards to VPC, this is a Nexus technology where when you configure VPC between two Nexus switches, so this is Nexus 1 and Nexus 2, there are certain physical connections between the two switches, which we will be discussing about later. These two switches, when configured for VPC, will logically appear as one switch. There are physically two switches, but you have put them in a VPC domain, they will logically appear as one switch. So how is it working? Is it in an active passive mode? Which of these Nexus switches is handling traffic, control plane traffic, data plane traffic? What are the best practices, certain design considerations? We will be discussing everything to do with that. Once again, like I said earlier, we get into the topic. Now, once we're done with VPC, next we move on to VXLAN, which is one of the major Nexus technologies in the lab exam. So what is VXLAN? Is it very similar to VLAN? If it is similar, okay, then what is the difference between VLAN and VXLAN, right? What are the different deployment methods in VXLAN? There are 3 deployment methods. Which one is preferred? Pros and cons of each of those deployment methods. We will be discussing that in VXLAN. Now again, before we move to VXLAN, we will also be discussing about multicasting. Okay, because a lot of multicasting topics, multicast is basically used in VXLAN as well. So we will be going through some basics of multicast. you know what is dense mode, sparse mode, there is bidirectional mode, there's concept of phantom RP and everything. So we will go through that. And then we will start off with VXLAN. Okay. Next, once we're done with Nexus technologies, we now move on to storage protocols. Again, nothing in detail. Many students normally ask, why, as data center experts, why are we studying about storage? It's not required. In offices, there's always a storage team that is going to handle the storage traffic. So why are we bothering about it? Yes, that's true. There's always a storage team. There's always a server team. But you as a data center expert, like I said earlier, you need to know what is going on in your own data center. What has been deployed, at least the basics of their working. Okay, so we will be covering some topics with regards to storage as well. So there are three architectures with regards to storage. You have DAS, NAS, and SAN, and three protocols in storage that we will be covering. So we have fiber channel, FCOE, that is fiber channel over Ethernet, and iSCSI. Apart from that, apart from that, there are certain terminologies that we will be covering, very, very important terminologies. So you have FLOGI, zoning, NPV, NPIV. So these are some topics that we will be covering in the storage module. All right. Now, apart from all of this, like I said, basics of certain topics are definitely going to be covered because you are going to be using them. You need them. So basics of protocols like OSPF, BGP, ISIS, BFD, bidirectional forwarding detection, FHRP protocols, that includes your HSRP and VRRP, right? You have multicasting related PIM, sparse mode, dense mode, bidirectional mode, IGMP, and certain security network related. You have RBAC, NTP, DHCP, right? Syslog, etc. So these are some basic topics that are going to be covered, which are very, very important. Now coming to automation and orchestration module. So this again is another important module. So I'll give you an introduction to each of these, just a basic introduction to each of these topics, but how they work and what type of devices, etc., we will get into the details later. So firstly, there is Cloud Center. What is Cloud Center? So like the name says, this is a centralized management for multiple clouds, right? You can centrally manage multiple types of clouds, the applications that these clouds are using, the infrastructure that is present in these clouds, etc. Just a centralized management for clouds and their applications and their infrastructure. Okay. Next is Cloud Intersite. So what is Cloud Intersite? This is software as a service, a platform, right? It's a SaaS platform. What is this used for? This again is used to centrally manage multiple UCS sites, UCS locations. Okay. Now, what is UCS? I'll give you a brief one-liner little later. Like you can see, we will be covering that, but it is used to manage multiple UCS sites. All right. DCNM, Data Center Network Management. Data Center Network Management is now also called as NDFC, that is Network Dashboard Fabric Controller. Okay. What is this? This is a network management platform for all your Nexus-enabled devices, Nexus-enabled deployments. Okay. So using this platform, you can centrally manage all of your Nexus-related devices and technologies, right? You can create new architectures, new storage deployments, etc. Basically, centrally managing Nexus and their technologies. Next is UCSD. So UCS Director, D stands for Director. This is one of the platforms of UCS. So in UCS, actually, there are three platforms. You have UCS Manager, you have UCS Central, and there is UCS Director. These are the three platforms of UCS. Now, what is the difference between the three? What are the pros and cons? What are the benefits of using UCS? We will be discussing all that later. Okay, so just to give you an introduction to what is UCS, UCS Director over here, UCS Director is used to centrally manage different platform of devices. So from UCS Director itself, you can manage switches, routers, firewalls, storage devices, virtual devices, etc. Different platforms of devices. Okay. Last but not the least is HyperFlex. HyperFlex is a hyper-converged solution. What is the meaning of hyper-converged solution and converged solution? So converged solution or converged network is where you have a separate device that is providing you switching capabilities, separate device that is providing you your server capabilities, and a separate device that is providing you your storage capabilities. A traditional architecture, right? You have a server device, you have a switch device, you have a storage device. This is what is called as your converged architecture. Okay, I'll write it over here. What is meant by hyper-converged architecture? Hyper-converged architecture is where there is a chassis and you can buy and insert modules into the chassis. So you can have a server module, you can have a switch module, and you can have a storage module all inserted and managed from the same chassis. Instead of having such separate devices, you can just manage together from a single chassis. Okay, so how does it work? What about the connectivity? We will be discussing that as we move ahead into the topic. Okay, now once we're done with this, we then move on to UCS, Unified Computing System. Now, what is UCS? To give you an introduction to what is UCS, UCS is basically centralized management of servers. Okay, so instead of managing your servers one by one, what you can do is there is something called as a UCS chassis that is available, into which you can insert certain servers. Okay, you can insert some servers and you can use UCS platform to basically manage all of these servers. So from UCS controller, you can configure policies, templates, whatever configurations it is that you want to configure, and you can push all of these configurations onto your required server. Now, what are the benefits of using UCS? What types of servers can I manage using UCS? Like I said, there are different platforms of UCS. You have UCS Manager, there is Central, there is Director. What are the differences between each of those platforms? Right? How is it that we are configuring these policies on the controller and pushing it? How is that the communication is taking place? We will discuss all of this. And lastly, there's a very, very important lab in UCS, which is called as boot from SAN. So how does the lab work? What is boot from SAN? We will discuss that. All right. Once we're done with the UCS module, again, UCS module is very important. Once we're done with UCS module, we move to the next important module, which is ACI. Now, UCS is used to manage servers, right? This is server management platform. UCS is server management platform. Then what is ACI? In short, ACI is a switch management platform. Okay. Now, what type of switches? We'll discuss that. Do the switches have to be connected in a certain order? Yes, there is a certain order, which is basically your two-tier architecture. That is how your switches have to be connected to each other. Now, again, what is this two-tier architecture? What are the advantages of using two-tier architecture? We will discuss that. In ACI also, just like there's a UCS controller from where you're going to be configuring and then pushing these configurations, just like that, in ACI also there is a controller. So you configure whatever is required and you push whatever configurations it is that you want on any of your switches. Okay, so how is it that these all of these switches are discovered? There is a fabric discovery process. How is it that the controller is communicating with these devices? What are the protocols? How is it that you can configure on the controller and push the configurations? There are certain integrations that are supported as well. So this is your ACI fabric, right? You have all of these switches connected here. This is your ACI fabric. Integrations are accepted as well. So you can integrate this ACI fabric with virtualization, as in with virtual devices, right? Where your endpoints, your end hosts can be VMs. You can integrate it with firewall devices. You can integrate it with other security devices as well, like IDS and IPS devices, right? In intrusion detection systems or intrusion prevention systems, etc. So how are these integrations supported? We will be discussing about those. All right. Now, last but not the least, security and network services. Now, please again remember, all these topics come under basics itself. Okay, most of these topics are a part of CCIE security. They are covered in detail in CCIE security track. But again, you are going to become a data center expert. You need to know the basics of what is running in your data center. So these are some topics that we will be covering, like access lists, RBAC, PBR, policy-based routing, another PBR, which is policy-based redirection, right? Telemetry export, SPAN, SNMP, syslog, NTP, BTP, queuing, policing, COPP, etc. So these are all some topics that we will be covering. Again, very basics. All right. So all of these are going to be covered during the course duration. Okay. So with this, let's begin our CCIE journey with a lot of enthusiasm. I am sure all of you have the ability to crack it. All the very best.